Greetings, everyone, and depending on which day you're listening to this, a very Merry Christmas to you. Welcome back to another episode of the Real Deal Landman Show. We have again with us today another industry legend in Mr. Doug Sandridge. So pleased to have him with us. I know, so Drew, you've started posting teasers about who we've got coming up, and no offense to our other people, but Doug generated some excitement. People were like, I can't wait to see this guy. Yeah. Doug, don't seem so surprised.
It generated excitement, I'll tell you, on mine of, Doug, we have ran in the same circles for a long time. Our paths have never actually crossed after all these years. And so whenever Jerris told me that we were going to be able to get you on the show, I was super excited about it. So this is a really cool opportunity for me, and I'm really pumped to have you on today.
Great. Fantastic. I'm glad to be here. It's exciting. I just met Jerris a few weeks ago, so it was great.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Well, Jerris, you're in your home base in where, Colorado? In Colorado Springs?
That's right.
That's right. And then Doug is in Golden, Colorado right now. So I'm holding down the fort here, representing the kind of the holiday cheer. I've got that going on in the office. What are you guys doing for the holidays? I mean, this is one of the busiest weeks out of the year for people traveling or anything. Are either of you traveling outside of Colorado for Christmas? Or are you guys there and having family come in?
I am not. So every year, our family usually takes the visit back to Oklahoma. And this year, we spent some time there for Thanksgiving, and the kids really wanted to stay put. And so we're staying put. Nice. And really looking forward to it.
That sounds relaxing. It's pretty good. How about you, Doug?
All three of my kids are grown, and we went to LA to visit one of my daughters for Thanksgiving, and my other two kids flew out to LA to hang out with them, and with my mom as well. And but we're excited to be here for Christmas, and all my kids are here coming in for Christmas, and my mom has already arrived. So yeah, everyone's here.
That is going to be a packed house. That's a lot of fun.
What is it like going to LA during holidays? Is it nice? Is it a mess?
No, it's wonderful. I mean, especially if you're in Colorado and you're already shoveling snow, and to go out to LA for 3 or 4 days over Thanksgiving, what's not to like? We were at Santa Monica Beach, and it's beautiful weather. I don't think I would want to live there, but it's a great place to visit for a few days over Thanksgiving holiday for sure.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Well, Doug, we do have a special topic that we want to get into with you today, but for the very few people out there who may not know who you are, tell us a little bit about your background. Are you a landman? What is your career been in the land profession? What are you currently doing these days?
Yes, I am a landman. I grew up, my father was a petroleum geologist, and most of my childhood was spent overseas in Europe and Africa, South America, different places. And then I finished high school in Midland, Texas, of all places, and wound up going to the University of Oklahoma. And my father is deceased, but he retired from Phillips after almost 40 years. And my mom still lives in Oklahoma, so I'm back in Oklahoma quite a bit. So I graduated from University of Oklahoma with a degree in petroleum land management. That's what we used to call it in the day. And amazingly, I was started out in architecture, and then decided to transfer in the College of Engineering. When my sophomore year in college, I didn't know what kind of engineer I wanted to be. I was just taking the basic classes. But I declared myself to be a nuclear engineer, mainly because it sounded cool.
It does sound cool.
Not that I had a lifelong passion for nuclear engineering, but it was a cool thing to do. And then my sophomore year was when 3 Mile Island accident happened in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And so everyone was bailing out of nuclear. And so I ended up back in the oil and gas business like my dad. And so I've been in the oil and gas business since I started my first job in high school in 1975. So July 16th of next year, I will have been working in some phase of oil and gas for 50 years.
Oh my gosh.
That's amazing. That's really cool. And so what towns were you in Oklahoma City to start off with?
I started off, well, when I was born in Fort Benning, Georgia. We quickly moved to Athens, Texas, and then to Bartlesville, Oklahoma City, Amarillo, just the whole gamut before we moved overseas. And then after college, I lived in Oklahoma City for a number of years, in Denver, and also in Wichita Falls, Texas. So all my kids were born in Wichita Falls.
It's amazing. So you've done some consulting work. Is it EE3 LLC? Was that one of the companies?
Yes, I have mostly worked for small companies. I worked for a couple of a little bit larger companies. I worked for Forest Oil for a while, and that was a little bit larger animal. But mostly I've worked for small companies, startups. And E3 was a private equity startup. We did purchase some properties that were owned by EOG and proved up a Niobrara project up in the mountains, believe it or not, the mountains of Colorado, up near Walden, not far from Steamboat. And then we flipped it to Sandridge Energy. Sandridge Energy, the name is purely coincidental.
I was teeing you up right there. I just could not wait to be like, you're selling yourself short. You've got a building named after you downtown in Oklahoma City. I mean,
they always assume that. And it was funny because my father was a geologist and he was living in Oklahoma, and he always assumed that someday when he retired from Phillips, he'd probably start his own consulting firm, probably not do anything except have an office and a Wall Street Journal and go in every day to get out of the house. But he always thought, I'm going to name my company Sandridge Energy. And at the time I was living in Texas, and he called me one day and he says, who the hell took my name? Sandridge, somebody formed a company called Sandridge Energy. At the time, I'd never heard of it. So I did a little research and found out that Tom Ward had a little falling out with Aubrey, and they decided to split up. And Tom Ward wanted to start his own company, very much like Chesapeake, the same sort of philosophy. But he didn't want to start from scratch, so he went out and bought a company out at Amarillo called Real Deal Energy, and Malone Mitchell's company. And he bought the company and then renamed it Sandridge for no particular reason. And so I called my dad back and said, you're not going to believe it, but this is Tom Ward. He just bought a company and renamed it Sandridge Energy. And he said, who did he buy? And it turns out my dad was friends with Mitchell.
Always, whenever I first saw you on LinkedIn, that was one of the made up scenarios that I had in my head of you just walking into Sandridge Energy and just being like, Doug Sandridge here to see Tom Ward. They would obviously hit that elevator button for you and get you right up there.
And the funny thing was, so we sold EE3 to Sandridge Energy, and then they hired me to do some work for them. And so Doug Sandridge goes to work for Sandridge Energy, but it's totally coincidence. And my dad always thought that was funny. He pretended to be mad, but he took advantage of the Sandridge Energy name because he lived in Oklahoma City, lived in Norman. And so he would always be assumed to be mistaken. And those were the days when Sandridge was kind of high flying. And he would be assumed to be the Mr. Sandridge. So he showed up at the Oklahoma Hall of Fame ceremony one time. I guess a friend of his was being inducted. And so he just shows up in his tuxedo with my mom. And he gets to the front desk and they said, oh, Mr. Sandridge, you'll be sitting at the front table with the governor. Well, whoever did, they just assumed. So he took advantage of the name, even though he pretended to be mad about it. And the first time I went to Sandridge, of course, they're in the old Kerr McGee buildings, 30 stories tall, and they got a guard downstairs. So I show up there, and the first thing the guard wants is you to hand him a driver's license so they can get you a visitor pass. And I hand him the driver's license, and now he's fumbling around. He's looking down. He won't look at me. He doesn't know what to say. And he finally says, I've been here 10 years. I didn't even know there was a Mr. Sandridge. And continuing to yank his chain, I said, oh, no worries. That was my dad. I'm no big deal. And I told him to relax. So
that's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. The free cups of coffee and also the stories of them going home being like, you'll never believe who I met today.
Yeah, I met him.
Came in the lobby, the man himself.
Well, it's funny because, when they were high flying, it was a good thing. Everyone was like, oh, wow, you're Mr. Sandridge, or you're somehow. My daughter was at University of Oklahoma. Everyone jumped to the same conclusion with her. They thought, oh, her dad's a big oil man, And then, of course, Sandridge took a pretty big nosedive, and they aren't quite what they used to be. And now my wife and I will go through security at the airport in Oklahoma City, and somebody will say, yeah, I lost a lot of money on Sandridge. Everyone's bitter when they see my name now.
Well, you really have had a 40-plus year career at Fulcrum Capital and everything. I know we want to get to that too, but you also the founder of Energy Policies US, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And then more recently, the thing that probably I'm most proud of, we started an organization a couple of years ago called Oil and Gas Executives for Nuclear Energy.
Okay.
and basically working with the nuclear industry, thinking it's not our industry, but we can appreciate another good energy industry when we see one. And we don't think it's helpful to have people thinking that oil and gas people and the oil and gas industry is anti-nuclear. So we started this organization to try and help promote the nuclear energy.
So you've been an adjunct professor at OU.
Yes.
For a while. And are you still doing that?
No, I don't teach a regular class anymore. It's just too time consuming, but I do still lecture at least twice a year, usually 3 times a year at the energy management program there. So I'll be speaking there in January again.
That's awesome. And I was the energy management. I got to be an adjunct professor at Oklahoma City University.
Really?
So
good for you.
so super kind of cut of the same cloth there. But the thing that I like on your LinkedIn, one of the things that Doug says is he believes that educating the public about the energy sector is crucial for fostering a sustainable and prosperous future. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with what you were talking about with like the nuclear program of, we've got to work together and we've got to find that commonality and the ground that we can share just to continue to build all of us up. So I really appreciate that. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, energy education is really important. And I think that we can't expect to have better policy until we have better energy IQ. And if we have a better energy IQ and the public understands energy, we will demand better energy policy from our policymakers. Our policymakers do what they think we want. So we need to tell them we want better. And so the first step of that is better energy education for sure.
That's fantastic.
How has that commentary increased or changed recently with nuclear being so much more of a forefront topic in association with all these data centers that are popping up?
It has been changing. We've been hoping for a nuclear renaissance, for the last decade, and we've been on the cusp of some nuclear renaissances in the past, and then something bad has happened, like Chernobyl or Fukushima, and then everyone's gone back in their hole. But for the last few years, there's been a good building momentum for nuclear energy, and of course, from my standpoint, and people that I hang around with, and energy bros, people that know about energy, we recognize how good nuclear energy is. And I think it needs to be part of the solution. It may not be all the solution, but we're not going to do the things that we need to do without more nuclear energy. But a lot of the people that are in the nuclear conversation right now have come to it through climate. So a lot of the people I deal with in nuclear advocacy are there not because they necessarily believe that nuclear is the superior technology. They just feel like they are so concerned about climate, they see that as the only way that we're going to have safe, reliable, affordable energy and address climate concerns at the same time. So I think that's where we are now, and we are building a lot of momentum. When I first started getting involved with the discussion of nuclear energy and started advocating for nuclear energy actively back in 2021, I was doing it mainly just to save existing nuclear power plants. I wasn't really thinking about building out lots of new nuclear energy. But now the conversation has it's just spiraled forward. There's a lot of oil and gas companies that are invested in nuclear energy. Chris Wright, hopefully our next Secretary of Energy, he's a huge supporter of nuclear energy. His company, Liberty Energy, headquartered here in Denver, they're an investor in a nuclear company, a small modular reactor company, Oklo Energy. And then there's a lot of other companies, including Chevron and Exxon and NOV, that are all actively engaged in the nuclear space. And I actually think that the oil and gas companies may be in a position, especially the service companies too, to help push the development of nuclear energy because they're big projects that take a lot of money, a lot of time. You have to have good project management skills. You got to have good supply chain skills. You have to have research and development skills, manufacturing skills. Well, who in the world now does big projects? Offshore projects are done by oil companies. They have all of those skill sets. So I think those companies are realizing the same skill sets that they use to do large offshore development can be applied to develop nuclear energy. So I'm not saying they're going to be the only ones, but I think oil and gas companies are going to be very involved in the development of nuclear going forward in the next decade.
That's fantastic. That's fascinating work, and that's not something I was aware that you were so involved in. Nuclear is definitely a topic that should continue to come up, especially for any kind of proponent of energy. The demand that we as a country and we as a world will have is certainly not going to go away or diminish anytime soon. But speaking of energy sources, alternative to oil and gas, people are also looking at wind energy and solar energy and other renewables. And there have been some interesting happenings regarding wind energy in Oklahoma. And you're somewhat of an expert in terms of what the controversy is and what these events have been. So take us through this a little bit. What's been going on in northern Oklahoma in regards to wind turbines?
So I want to, first of all, I want to acknowledge Robert Bryce. I'm sure you guys know Robert Bryce pretty well, and he's a friend of mine. But he is the first person who brought national attention to this issue of the Osage wind farm. Anything I've done is, built on his shoulders, and he's the one who first broke the story last year. It's been going on for 10 years, but nobody's been covering it. And so he wrote a story last December. And it's about a wind farm in Osage County, which is located in northeastern Oklahoma, up by Tulsa, just to the west of Bartlesville, northwest of Tulsa. And it all starts on the Osage Reservation, which is basically the extensive Osage County. And the first wind farms were being developed in Oklahoma in about 2001. So we have a lot of wind in Oklahoma. There's no reason why Oklahoma could not be a premier developer of wind energy. And the capacity factors of wind in Oklahoma are above the national average. So it's not a bad place to operate, but not everybody wants their wind farm in their backyard. And I'm not going to speak ill of wind as a whole. I try and be more fair-minded and open-minded about, as a professor and as a teacher and lecturer, and I'm not out to demean, anybody else's energy. So anything that I say here today about that wind farm is not intended to be a blanket. It's not meant to degrade or demean wind energy as a whole. It's a very specific case, and I want to say that. And so this story gets started. The history of the Osages, for me, is extremely, extremely interesting, and it really puts the story of the wind farm in context. So the Osage tribe really began, or it's been around for thousands of years. They immigrated here at some point from across the Bering Strait from Asia. But the Osage tribe, as we kind of know them today, has probably been around for 700 or 1,000 years. And they were located primarily in the Ohio Valley area of Illinois. If you look at their historic range, they might have gone as far as eastern Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, northern Louisiana, Arkansas. And as the western expansion of Western Europeans continued to march, all of the tribes were put under pressure for land and resources. And the Osage, they observed how a lot of the other tribes were dealing with the white man or the Western European, and they learned some lessons. They decided early on that one thing they could do to help themselves was to be better educated, because if they could be better educated, they could be in a better position to push back against the Western European expansionism. Now, the tribe was pushed off of their native lands. They were eventually pushed onto a reservation in southeastern Kansas. And early on, they recognized, as I said, the need for education. So they actually petitioned the U.S. government to provide Jesuit priests to their tribe, not for the purpose of conversion, but for the purpose of educating them, giving them more of a liberal Western education. And then it was in the 1870s, I believe 1872, when the tribe was told that they needed that land in Kansas and the U.S. government was going to take that reservation away from them. However, the U.S. government purchased it from them, not saying it was a fair price, not commenting on, whether it was a good deal, but the U.S. government did pay them for the reservation. And now they were on their own to figure out what they're going to do. They took the money that they got for the reservation southeastern Kansas, and they were looking for a new homeland. And they went to Oklahoma, which at that time was still Indian territory. And a lot of other tribes had been pushed from the southeastern United States, from the northern United States, even from the southwestern United States into the Indian territory. And they found that the Cherokee tribe had a lot of land, but was cash poor. And they made a deal to buy some of the Cherokee reservation. So Osage County was originally part of the Cherokee reservation, and they paid the cash the U.S. government had paid them. to buy that reservation. And now they own their own reservation, which is essentially the boundaries of Osage County.
Interesting.
So they own their own land, and they're still at that time a sovereign nation within the boundaries of what the United States was claiming as their nation. The United States is claiming that, but each of these tribes still had their own sovereignty and is a nation within a nation. We've heard stories a lot about how Indians or Native Americans, First Americans, however they want to be referred to, how they a lot of times their kids were forced to assimilate, were taken away from the tribe, sent to schools. That's just terrible, a tragedy. That is not something we should ever be proud of. The Osage, on the other hand, actually had their kids more educated in the Western ways. They took some of the money they got from the sale of their Kansas reservation and helped pay for a school in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And they voluntarily sent their kids there to get a better education, again, so they could be better prepared to deal with the Westerners, the Western Europeans. So now fast forward to 1906, and the tribe, the U.S. government wants to assimilate these tribes into the U.S. government, to the U.S. so that they can diffuse the ability of the Indians to govern themselves, take away some of their sovereignty. And so what they do is they have a treaty of allotment, which basically means that they allot the lands that they have. In return, they give up some of their tribal rights, but they get the rights to be U.S. citizens. So the Osage tribe, there's a point to the story. The Osage tribe negotiated this allotment, but they negotiated it differently than many other tribes. And many of the other tribes signed treaties without maybe having the full benefit of everything they could have gotten. The Osage agreed to an allotment treaty. So what happened is they took all the lands in Osage County, and they allotted those lands to all of the Osage tribal members. But they only allotted the surface. They did not allot the minerals. And see, in a lot of cases, when they did allotments, an Indian would get the surface and the minerals. And then once it's allotted to them, they could do with it whatever they want. So they allotted all the surface to the tribal members. So the Osage County was still owned 100% by Osage tribe members. But then once it was allotted to the Osage tribal members, those members were free to dispose of their land however they wanted. The Osage, however, did something that was unusual, and they kept all of the minerals in the tribe for the benefit of the tribe as a whole, so that in the future, for rock development, oil and gas development, coal development, whatever it would all be shared by all the members of the tribe. So over the last 100 years or more, a lot of Osage County, the surface has been sold. I would say probably 80% or more of the surface is now owned by non-Osage. Now, the reservation consists of the whole county, but the surface is owned by a lot of people that are not Osage anymore. But all the minerals are still owned by the Osage. So, predecessor to NL Energy. NL is a Italian energy company doing a lot of wind development in the U.S., they had decided they were going to come in and they built a lot of wind farms in the U.S., and they thought that Osage County would be a good place to develop a wind farm. And so rumors started to come out that they were going to be developing this wind farm, and the tribe did not want it. They said, this is sacred ground. We don't want the wind turbines killing eagles, our sacred bird. We don't want it. But unfortunately for them, they didn't really have any standing to stop the wind farm because the NL had obtained leases, surface leases, from people who were willing to build a wind farm. The tribe sued them in federal court, asking the court to stop the wind farm. And the court said, we are sympathetic to your needs. We're sympathetic to what you want to do. We understand why you don't want a wind farm here. But these people have bought leases from people who own the surface. They've got all the permits from the county. They have every right to build the wind farm. So fast forward to 2013, NL gets ready to start building the wind farm. And of course, when you build a wind farm, you have to build foundations for these massive wind turbines. And so we're all landmen here, so we know about property rights. And so they have surface rights. They don't have any mineral rights, but the surface rights in virtually every jurisdiction in the United States affords you a reasonable use of the subsurface. So if, for instance, Jerris is building a house down in southern Colorado, he owns the surface. He still has the right to build a swimming pool or build a basement. So he has the right to use a reasonable amount of the subsurface. He can't go mining or drilling oil wells on his property, but he can use a reasonable amount. So NL goes out and they're getting ready to build these wind turbine foundations, which have to be huge, and you have to excavate soil out and put in steel and concrete to hold these things up. So they're all within their rights to do that. Absolutely 100% within their rights to do that. So they start digging out these holes and they set the rock to the side. Perfectly fine. They start putting cement and concrete in the hole for the foundation. And then NL, this is where they make the mistake. They decide to take that rock and put it on trucks and take it to a commercial rock processing plant and crushing it and sorting it and making it into commercial grade products. So when the tribe saw this, I mean, immediately, this isn't a year later or 5 years later, literally within a few days, when the tribe saw what they were doing, they called NL and said, you have the right to build a wind farm. We don't like it, but you have the right. You have the right to dig a hole. You have the right to set the rock to the side. You do not have the right to take our rock and make commercial use of it. That is mining.
Wow.
NL said, we don't believe you. They totally disrespected the tribe. And they said, no, they didn't pay any attention to what the tribe said. They didn't recognize the sovereignty of the tribe. So the tribe, feeling very disrespected, they go to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and say, we need your help. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs researches all of these facts and determines that that's exactly right, that they don't have the right to use the rock. So the Bureau of Indian Affairs sends a cease and desist letter to NL's headquarters in Rome and said, you can continue building the wind farm, you can continue digging holes, but you got to stop making commercial use of the rock because you have no permit for that. And NL, not only did they ignore the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they sped up their operations. Has anyone ever heard of a wind farm being constructed 24 hours a day with lights in the middle of the night? I've not. Normally you build during the day and then you shut down overnight. Right. But they were so worried that they were going to get shut down, they decided, I'm presuming, I don't know what was in their mind. It appears that they decided to speed up the construction so they could finish it before they got shut down, with the idea that once you get it constructed, then nobody's going to really just take it down. What do you do? So they completely ignored it, continued to build the wind farm, finished the wind farm. Of course, then they start producing energy. They get 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour for every kilowatt that they produce. And so they're making a lot of money out here, but they have been illegally mining the rock to construct the project. The federal government decides they will sue NL on behalf of the tribe because the U.S. has so much greater resources, legal resources. So this works its way through the federal courts for 10 years until December of last year. I think it may have been a year ago today, on the 23rd of last December. And what's happened is, if NL had just done the right thing, they would still have, they'd be fine. They would have got a slap on the wrist. They would have been charged probably a fine for trespassing, a few $100,000. They'd have been charged for the rock that they took out. But that's it. It would have been a very minor thing. But instead, they continued to poke in the eye of the tribe, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the U.S. Department of the Interior, and now the federal court, and worse, the federal court judge. And they wasted a lot of time and money fighting this thing, which they're clearly wrong about. So last December, the judge in Tulsa, the federal court judge in Tulsa, said, not only are we going to fine you, or we're going to give some punitive damages for what you've done, but because you've been so belligerent and you've been so adamant in wasting the court's time, we're going to demand that you tear down the wind farm. So they have been ordered to completely tear down and reclaim 84 wind turbine sites. And so that's the decision that came down in December. Then there was still the decision of, well, what do we do? What about the damages for the trespass and the rock that was being used illegally, and for the court fees and the attorney's fees? And so the court said, you guys need, give us an idea of what we could settle on. What would be? And NL completely stonewalled again. They said, we're so far apart, we don't see how we can possibly ever agree. The court then ordered them to go to mediation or a conference in September, where they would sit down and each side would present their case, and then they would agree. But hopefully, she was trying to avoid her having to make the decision. She was trying to force them, saying, look, this is going to get settled. So why don't you guys settle it yourself rather than the court ordering it? So on September 25th or 27th, they were supposed to meet in Tulsa, and NL refused to show up. They just didn't show up. Their attorneys didn't show up. Their executives didn't show up. Nobody showed up. So now the court this last week is infuriated with them. So she's reaffirmed in her decision last Wednesday, she reaffirmed that they have to tear down all 84 wind turbines. She's reaffirmed that they have to reclaim all the property. They have to tear out all the substations, all the power lines. Everything has to be torn out and reclaimed. She awarded a fairly modest amount of money for the damages for the rock. I think it was around $300,000 is all for the rock and the trespass. But she awarded the tribe $36 million for legal fees.
Oh my
And that just came down the pike last week. So we'll see. I mean, NL has been belligerent from the very beginning. And again, I want to emphasize this is a blemish on NL. This is not a blot on all renewable companies. It's not a blot on all or wind companies, but they have just really given the industry a black eye. So,
and I know this is a very particular set of facts and circumstances. Is there anything from this case and this incident that will have precedent in other projects? You know, the fact of them taking the rock out constituted mining, is that going to become a universal definition that is true for all wind projects or for any kind of industrial projects?
I think it is going to be true for other projects. However, I have talked to, as you might imagine, I'm sure you guys do, I know a lot of people from our industry, from landmen, who are currently working doing renewable development.
Yeah, sure.
They're buying leases.
Yeah, for sure.
And I've talked to everyone I've talked to, and has said the same thing. If you don't want to use the rock, then you don't need a mining permit. And a lot of times the rock isn't of the right quality to use if you're digging it up, or you'd rather just bring in cement from the nearest town or whatever. And then if you do want to use those materials, well, then that needs to be part of the lease, whether it's with the surface owner. If they also own the minerals, then the surface lease needs to also give you the rights to mine the minerals. Or if the mineral ownership is severed, like it is in this case, where the mineral ownership is different than the surface ownership, well, then you have to make a separate deal with the mineral owner. But I have not found a single person that I know working in this industry who is not aware of that, who is not already doing that. We all know as landmen, if you're going to use the mineral estate, you need a lease covering that. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, I think that it has set a precedent, but I think most people almost everybody is adhering to the rules. It's just NL decided that they didn't understand property law in the U.S., or they didn't want to believe it, or they just didn't want to recognize the tribe.
I would love to know internally who was advising them to make all of these. It seems like there's so many opportunities there that they could have rectified this, or that they could have avoided what is, inevitably going to come.
They got a lot of $1,000 an hour attorneys from New York and Oklahoma City and Tulsa all working on this project. I'm quite certain that the attorneys that were working on them had to have told them. They had to have been advising them, and they were just deciding not to take the legal advice. That's what it looks like.
Unbelievable.
Did NL ever have any kind of press releases or commentary that defended their actions or why they felt like that they were in the right?
I'm not aware of anything that they've said since the judgment that came down last December. Now, prior to that, they continually had press releases and public statements saying, we never mined. This did not constitute mining, silly things like that. But it's even worse than just digging out the holes, because I wrote a Substack article on this back in June, and I included in there a picture, one of the sites where they built the wind turbine. And you can see adjacent to the wind turbine site where they've built the foundation, they've also built another pit. They've actually open pit mined additional material beyond what came out of the foundation. And for them to claim that they were not doing mining is just delusional. And again, if they had just admitted their wrongdoing at the beginning and done the right thing and said, I'm sorry, and here's a check, and how do we make this right? The wind farm would be fine. But so it's a good lesson, especially for wind developers and solar developers, that land issues are important. And in the oil business, how much effort we go to make sure that we're doing proper title. We don't want to drill a well on a tract of land that we don't own the minerals. You've drilled somebody a free well. And so we do title searches before we buy the leases. Then we do title opinions before we drill the well. We do division order title opinions after we drill the well.
So you mentioned Substack. Is that a medium that you use to share more insights on if people want to learn more about this Osage story or other insights that you have, is that a good place for them to look?
Absolutely. I started this a couple of years ago, and we love Substack because it's a way of writing where you're not subject to any sort of censorship. You're responsible for your own content. Reader beware. I love it. And so on Substack, you can either charge for your writing or not charge for your writing. I do not charge for my writing because first of all, I don't feel like I'm a professional, so I'm not really entitled to require remuneration for my work. But also, I want it read by as broad an audience as I can. And the name of my Substack, if you just Google or search on the internet for Energy Ruminations Substack, or put in my name, Doug Sandridge Substack, it'll come up, and then you go to the Substack website and you can get my articles or articles of Robert Bryce or whoever's articles you want. So yes, I do publish on Substack, but it's a hobby. And more importantly, I want to make sure that I, make my kids proud of what I'm doing.
You can tell just on the time that we've talked to you today, and I mean, what you're doing with Substack and what you've done just through OU and everything else, the education, and just exactly what is on your website of trying to, give that fostering relationship for educating the public is just at the forefront for you. And I think there's nothing more. That's a very braggable thing. That's wonderful.
Well, I don't. Thank you. I don't do exclusively Native American subjects. I do all sorts of energy subjects, whether it's wind, solar, nuclear, whatever the subject is. I write about all things energy. But just so happens I do have a new Substack coming out the first week of January, which is about another Native American issue out in California. So I'll just tease it a little bit.
That's great.
Hopefully in January.
So if you are interested in checking out Doug's writings and be able to get kind of a more in-depth look at a lot of these different subjects, check out that Substack. So where can people find out? Just mostly LinkedIn, or do you have a list of where you're going to be?
I think LinkedIn's probably the best site, the best way to contact me. That's the one that I pay the most attention to. So to contact me to see what I'm working on, if you want to talk to me about speaking or coming and talking to somebody about a subject, that's probably the best way to reach me.
I think that's fantastic. And your LinkedIn, honestly, is one of the better energy ones out there. It's not only just educational, but it also has some really cool stories. And just the recent one about St. Andrew's Golf Course, I thought I absolutely loved that.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, it wasn't energy related, but it was timely. I got more hits on that article than anything I've written about energy in the last 6 months. I mean, people love the personal stories. So I try to limit it and keep it professional. But I did get a lot of feedback from that story.
I think people enjoy seeing the journey that all of us are on. And I'm saying that broadly we all like seeing LinkedIn of learning about the content of what people's companies are doing and what people are doing professionally, but to get a glimpse kind of under the hood and to be able to see who that person is. And you really start to relate a little bit more. And I think those are the things that are more important. If I get on a plane and I go to Denver, or I go to Midland, or I go to Houston, I feel so much more connected to people whenever I hear just once out of every maybe quarter, I hear some good personal story about them. And it makes it all the more fun. I think the cool thing about the three of us on here is I think probably 2024. Jerris, do you know how many times you spoke at different conventions or anything? Jerris is a fantastic speaker.
I lost count. I don't mean that to boast, but that's just the honest truth. I lost count as to how many it was. It was a lot.
I have seen a couple of them. I always enjoy them. Doug, I haven't seen you in person give a speech, but I just the educational background that you gave on Oklahoma history. My father's in Oklahoma, or he was for 30 years, Oklahoma and American history. And I can tell you, he will, whenever I send him this link, he will absolutely love listening to that because he will know every single bit of it. So he's a huge fan of it. I think that's what's so fun about this is your speaking background, Jerris is speaking. We've got that connection with the teaching and everything. And I absolutely love it. Being able to, I think Jerris and I even talked about it on an early episode of this. It's amazing, number one, how quickly your career goes. And that caught up with me way too fast. And I didn't think that a younger generation would be turning and asking me questions because I always thought, oh yeah, I'm totally the younger generation. Not at all. And the white in the beard definitely proves that. But to be in that era now of where I can go and speak at these different places and be able to share what little wisdom I have gained along the way and what this industry has meant to me and how I want to make sure that it's taken care of.
Let's be clear, this industry is not going away.
That's right.
Not anytime soon. Last year, we used and produced more crude oil than any year in history.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Last year, we used and produced more natural gas than worldwide than any year in history. In the U.S., we produced more oil than any year in history. And we set a record in 2023. And unless something happens the next few days, we will have set another record for coal use this year. It will be the highest year of coal use in the world history this year. You know, I'm not really kind of editorializing whether that's good or bad. I'm just stating the fact that those are facts. And the fact is, no matter what you think or how hard you try, we have another generation of oil and gas people. We're going to be needing now. They're still going to need petroleum for the other 6,000 products we make every day out of petroleum. So petroleum is not going anywhere. So you're mentoring the next generation. I hear people say, well, do we need landmen and petroleum geologists and engineers anymore? Yes, we do. We're going to need them as long as we can remember, as long as we can think forward.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Well, we really appreciate you being on with us today. This has been absolutely educational. It's been absolutely entertaining. We're going to do a speed run on this thing.
Okay,
we're going to go quick on this one. And the reason is, number one, is in getting to know Doug over the last hour here, I know that he hasn't watched all of these up to this, and so I realize everything we're going to be saying here is spoilers. I know totally that he is going to be watching this with his family, so I want to be able to properly prepare him for some of the things that he's going to be able to see. And Jerris already knows that there are some certain things that I don't know if I would sit down with, my grandkids on either side of me and show them this wonderful, wonderful reflection of the industry that we all know and love. So I entitled this one, this was episode, was it 7 or 8, Jerris?
This is 7. Yep.
Now I know it has an actual title from Paramount Plus, but I wrote that this one was episode 7, Angela and Ainsley find purpose and clothing for the first few fleeting minutes.
Yeah.
And so we pick up in that show of Ariana is picking Cooper up from the hospital, and Tommy's there, and he automatically, just like the rest of us, he knows that this is not a good idea. We all have talked about this. She is 2 weeks after her husband has had this horrible accident, is no longer with us, and now she is pushing the wheelchair of obviously her future boyfriend to take him home, and Tommy sees this as a terrible, terrible idea. We cut to Ainsley and her mother working out, and they have this just deep conversation about how the only thing that they have to offer is their assets and how that is going to help them get whatever they want in life. So wonderful, deep character development. We go through a lot of different things here of Monty. We get to see a little bit of him. No Demi Moore this episode. Too many lines for her last week. Monty is making deals, and he is trying to get, did you catch how many wells he was trying to get? They were throwing out 60-40 and he was saying, no, that's not going to work for me. And I mean, this again, one of the things, did you catch, he said, well, then I'll take it over to the guys over at Diamond. And I thought that might have been like a little throw to like Diamondback, but I don't know. So he calls Tommy and he's like, hey, this is what we've got. And Tommy throws out all these things. He's like, if we do this, we're going to need all these plats. We're going to need these surveys. We're going to need the seismic. And Monty was probably like, yeah, the normal things. Like, like we've done this many times. Like, I'm glad you said it again, but yeah, those are normal. That's what we would get in this deal. Boss and the rest of the guys around the table as they were eating, Dale, my favorite character on the show. I love Dale. Monty called. They were like, hey, I think Tommy said something about like, speak of the devil. And they were like, that's not the devil. That's Satan himself. And they were like, well, what does that make us? And like, oh, we're demons. And that took it to Ainsley and Angela again. They got a lot of time on this episode. They got a lot more time than I thought they would. We got to do this. They were driving down the road in Midland. Ainsley looks to her left and she sees a retirement home, which I don't think she has ever seen or been aware of what those are in her entire life. And she asks a couple questions on it. Well, what is that? And her mother says, well, that's where older people go. And she's just very, very sad about this whole thing. This is new information to her. And so they both decide to change their entire plans of the day and go and spontaneously help a bunch of grandmas get drunk and play Cards Against Humanity with them. And so
what else are you going to do?
What else are you going to do?
Yeah.
And the staff at the nursing home, totally fine with this. So fine, in fact, they have an entire deal of residents that are now intoxicated, that whenever they're leaving, they go out to the parking lot, follow them out to the parking lot, and they say, what time do you think you can be here tomorrow? This was the greatest day forever. So if and when my parents are ever in a situation of where they're in an assisted living home, should I find out that two young ladies that just came from a spin class are coming with margarita mixers and doing tequila shots at the table with them, I don't know that I'm going to be too thrilled with the management there. But, we are living in a different age now. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. I don't know. We now go to the oil patch. We knew this was going to come up. Tommy said, he was just like, hey, boss, I've got to get you to start working on these wells. And boss was like, I don't want to. He said, well, get that crew that's down at the far end. And they were kind of the rough and tumble guys. And he's like, they're always packing heat. They've always got guns on them. Bring them in. And sure enough, 30 seconds into it, they're going to need those guns. The cartel comes out of nowhere and says, kind of shake them down. All the guys pull their guns out, scares the cartel guys off, but that's not going to be the end of it. Tommy makes a couple of good one-liners, leaves. But then we get to another wonderful part of his daughter is finally able to go to a patch party, which is a big deal in Midland, I know. Well, Doug, you lived in Midland for a while, so I'm sure you attended a ton of these things. What that is high school kids are going to go to a working pad site with as much alcohol as they possibly can fit in their trucks, and they're all going to get drunk and make wonderful decisions. And so Ainsley, on full display of her mother's charm and modesty, immediately picks out the high school superstar quarterback that is going to Tech, that is going on scholarship, immediately goes up to him and starts telling her plans. And her plans are, I'm going to college to get a philanthropy degree so that when my husband is a pro football player, I can start a charity and then we don't have to pay so much taxes. And I stood up and I saluted my TV and I paused it for a little while and I was like, this is absolutely fantastic. So she wants to set that up for a tax reason. Jumping back real quick to the other therapy session here is Ariana and Cooper. He's staying at her place. She's sleeping on the couch and he's like, you don't have to sleep on the couch. And we're like, foreshadowing. Tommy is asleep. Angela now has had a wonderful day of getting the older generation just absolutely intoxicated. She has now decided that she's going to be a fantastic mother. And so she starts sobbing in bed of, oh my gosh, my daughter, I'm tracking her location. She's out in the middle of a patch. She hasn't moved for a while, like she's dead or something like that. She wakes Tommy up. He has to go to the patch and he teleports there, which is the coolest thing. He is there in a matter of 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And we're talking just minutes before he becomes a grandfather. It is very, very close call here. So he pulls the fantastic quarterback off his daughter, punches him in the throat. I mean, Jerris, what am I leaving out here? I mean, we're moving fast here, but are you seeing anything that I'm not? Because
the other piece we've got to that scene is the cartel guy that's watching all this through night vision goggles.
Night vision.
So obviously that's
right.
More foreshadowing. And so my question is, does Ainsley get kidnapped and held for ransom in the next episode, or is that going to be the season-ending cliffhanger? Because obviously, I think the cartel was watching her, not watching Tommy, and they're getting ready to use the 17-year-old as leverage.
I mean, but if you think about that too, that guy was just standing out there watching these kids party with night vision goggles, just watching this. I mean, is that
maybe he was
for
bummed
Midland?
that he wasn't invited to a patch party? I don't know.
I mean, maybe it did look. It was fantastic. Cartel's watching. You're right. That's inevitably going to be the thing. I think the thing that made this kind of a downer episode for me is it really was like a realization of, I was like, we started off, very first scene that we talked about was like, holy cow, we've got Tommy negotiating a lease and he's hooded by the cartel members. A plane is getting plowed into. Like, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. And now we have tried, it feels like, and I'm getting too into it, it feels like they're trying too hard to like push that family element into it. And they're like, hey, we've really got to show you like who the daughter and who the wife are. But they don't have a lot of character depth episode after episode, and there's no real redeeming quality. So I'm sorry if that ever gets back to either one of the lovely actresses that play those parts, but good night. Like it's really something. So Tommy takes Ainsley home and he says, just lie to me next time. Like we're tracking your phone. Like just tell me nothing's happening and I'll be fine with it. As just wonderful fatherly advice to all of us out there. That's how I would definitely do it with, my two lovely daughters. Let's see. At the very end here, we go back to Cooper and Ariana waking up in the morning and like, we're like, will they, won't they? Are they going to kiss? Her husband's been dead for 2 or 3 days now. It's not that big a deal. Like, it's time to move on. And they just get started and knock on the door. Always terrible timing. And it's broken up by the two ex-lawyers, and they are coming back around to try to get her signature to pay out for the damages of her husband being unalived. And then Cooper comes in the room and he's like, hey, what's going on? And he sees that it's the contract, and Ariana says, you should read this for me. So now he is brought into the mix on reading the contract to see if it's a good deal for them. And the last line of the show is, are you, what was your name? I'm Cooper. Cooper Norris? We've been looking for you everywhere, or whatever. I don't know. Like, Jerris, this is your show. Thoughts?
So I like to go back and read recaps and look at things from the episode. And in doing so, I discovered that a website called Soap Central is tracking Landman and the episodes that are upcoming and what's happening. So the fact that a soap opera website includes the Landman show within its library of interest, I think that tells us everything we need to know.
That's pretty telling. I still stand by the thing of where I love seeing every week. I love seeing the comments that people put out on LinkedIn, and we kind of search around a lot of other social too. There's so many people within the industry that are saying, it's totally Hollywood. This is completely out the realm of what the normal day to day is, obviously. But there is a good subculture of people that, I mean, this really is what they're looking for. Kind of that Texas, and very similar to the Yellowstone and the rest of them of, hey, it's got a lot of drama. It's got all the different pieces of the puzzle that people are looking for. And, you got the cartel, you got the crazy. Hey, again, I go all the way back. Everybody on the show needs therapy. We need one episode of where it's just people just going into an office, just sitting down with a therapist for like 10 minutes at a time. And we would be able to fix a lot of this stuff.
Except Dale. Dale's the
no,
only real guy.
Dale's... he has never done anything wrong, nor will he ever do anything wrong. Dale is fantastic. So I tell you, Doug, I hope that this didn't ruin the entire, season for you. I want you to know that it is absolute just, Shakespearean theater is what it really is at this point.
Well, I saw the first episode, and as I mentioned earlier, my wife was not a fan of Yellowstone. So when she heard Taylor Sheridan was doing Landman, she had zero interest in watching. She said, that's something you can go down in the man cave and watch by yourself. When I fall asleep early, I don't want to watch it. And I went and watched the first episode. And then a week later, she comes home and she's like, everyone is asking me about Landman. I go to lunch and people are asking me about Landman. People are sending me texts about Landman. And everybody wants to know about it because everyone knows that she's married to a landman. And so she said, I guess I have to watch it. So we decided we'd watch it together. But we were waiting for Christmas because my kids were coming into town for Christmas, and everybody was going to watch it together to see what Dad Billy Bob Thornton, what he does for a living.
Well, the first words out of your mouth, let me just tell you, and I need you to do this. Whenever you all are, you've got the Yule log on the fire and you're going through like episode 2 or 3, I just don't say anything, no reaction, no anything. And then whenever they're all staring at you, just you feel every eye in the room staring at you, be like, this was my experience completely.
Yes.
For multiple years of my career, this was my story ripped straight from the pages.
Let me tell you about the first time I ran into the cartel.
Exactly. There you go. There you go.
I did relate to one thing that I thought was really funny, and that was that the first episode they had so I don't even know who all the characters are. They had the young white kid get in the truck with three guys who are obviously very well seasoned oil and gas vets. They're speaking Spanish. When I was in college, I was a roughneck. I roughnecked when I was at University of Oklahoma, and it was great because I could make more money in 3 days than my friends that were working at the shoe store at Campus Corner could make in a month.
That's right.
And I think I was making $12 or $13 an hour. And if I worked enough hours, that's $18 an hour overtime at time and a half. And minimum wage back then was $2.15 an hour or something. And so I had one of my roommates was a mudlogger. So he worked on the rigs, but they didn't pay mudloggers anything like a roughneck. And he was always jealous that I'm making the big bucks. I can work 3 days, a 3-day weekend, and make enough money for the whole month. And he's begging me, take me with you. I want to be a roughneck. And I think he somehow imagined in his mind, if he just went with me, then I could show him the rope. And all he needed to do is just stand close. And he didn't know any of the names of the wrenches or the elevators or, anything. Right. But and so finally I just got worn down and said, okay, I'm going out this week. And what you do back then is I'd go out to El Reno in Oklahoma, west of Oklahoma City, go to one of the rig companies. And on Saturday morning, you get there 4 or 5 in the morning and you write your name on the bulletin board and you put, I'm a derrick hand, I'm a floor hand, whatever. And then you wait there until it's apparent that somebody's not showing up for the next shift. And so I write my name on the board and he writes his name on the board. Neither of us thought this through because I assumed too that I was going to help him figure out, I was going to spend a couple of days with him and I would show him the ropes so that he, could be a roughneck. And so after we're sitting there for an hour, they come out and they look at the board and they said, Sandridge, truck 17, you're going to Elk City. Crawl, truck 4, you're going down to Ardmore. So we're going to 2 different places and 2 different crews. Well, I knew what I was doing. He gets in a crew, so he not only doesn't know anything about oil and gas, but the crew he got put with didn't speak any English. So he goes out on the rig for the very first time, and not only not know the tools, the jargon, what to do, what goes first, what's safety to do, but he couldn't even understand anyone to tell him. And of course, the rig hands were horrified that they got this greenhorn who didn't know anything. And we still laugh about it today. He never went out on the rig again. He went back as a mudlogger, but he never roughnecked again after that one day. So anyway.
Funny. Hey, let me tell you, we have enjoyed all of this, Doug. This has been fantastic. I cannot appreciate you being on this enough. For anyone, again, if you're trying to get a hold of Doug, get him through LinkedIn, get him on the Substack. And please try to find him at some point doing one of his speeches someplace because you're going to learn a lot.
Well, thanks for having me on. I hope to see you at NAPE or if not there, someplace else really, really soon. So thanks for having me on. It was great.
Absolutely.
Fun.
All right. Well, this has been another great episode. We have enjoyed our time with you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Subscribe, follow, like, smash that, whatever the kids are saying these days. Skibbity. I don't know. They say that too. So we'll see you next time. This is the Real Deal Landman Show. All the best.
See ya.
Thanks, guys.